I would like to briefly introduce our Keynote panel, which is titled Confronting the Crisis, a New Vision for Europe. We believe that this is the right moment to discuss broader context of the Eurozone and its debt crisis. We have heard yesterday and earlier today many and very complex opinions on many issues that are directly related to the Eurozone. We heard once again a clear diagnosis of the debt crisis. In fact, it's very good that we are not quarreling anymore about the root causes of a debt crisis, because that's the precondition for remedy. We of course have discussed extensively how to exit the euro crisis, and of course we asked the question whether we are already step by step witnessing the end of the euro crisis, as we see that the financial markets and bond markets at the beginning of the year have calmed down. There is a much more comfortable situation for the states to refinance on financial markets because the price for it went down at the beginning of the year. But the fundamental question is how long that comfortable situation can prevail. And of course, we've been extensively discussing what should be done in order to create and build a genuine economic and monetary union. Of course, there are other pertinent and pressing issues, like the one which is also open this morning. What is the impact of austerity policy and consolidation policy on economic growth? Obviously, we see many diverging views on this particular issue. Some arguing that what we do with the austerity policy is to detriment of economic growth. And I found it very interesting to hear somebody yesterday who said we shouldn't make a contradiction between consolidation policy and growth. Because if you want to have a steady, sustainable growth in the future, you definitely have to make your public finances sustainable and sound. But I believe that all those questions that I have mentioned are simply not enough, and we cannot bypass the question, what is the overall or more broader impact of debt crisis on the European Union as such, on the way how the European Union works, because the debt crisis, which has no doubt deep economic consequences, has reached far beyond this dimension and has profound impact on institutional setup, on the quality of integration, and therefore the question is really legitimate to ask what kind of vision we have about Europe of today and especially for the future. I'm glad that these questions about future, about vision, about going beyond the debt crisis can be asked and posed to two outstanding representatives of European institutions and bodies. Because in fact the question, be it very complicated, at the end of the day it is very simple. Are the member states ready to go for a deeper political integration that in fact is commensurate with the existence of common currency? Or are there any alternatives for this course, or do we share a consensus on the vision of the EU? The first speaker, Vice President of European Commission, Maroš Šefčovič, whom I give the floor right away, in my view is a very right person to speak on that issue, on vision of European Union, because he is representing the institution which per definition wants to be in a driving seat, wants to be a shaping force of the future economic and monetary union. In his portfolio, he's also covering the relationship between institutions, community institutions, especially the Commission towards the Council, the Commission towards European Parliament. But also, and I think that's important to mention, he is also responsible for the relationship with national parliaments. That gives him, I think, a very good feeling of what institutions think should be the vision of Europe, but also he is reaching out in his meeting citizens in the member states, and therefore he, I think, is the right person to ask what is the Commission's, what is your personal vision of the European Union. I would like to give you the floor, Vice President, but before that I want to say that we will have then a second speaker, Thomas Wieser, Chairman of two important bodies, committees, Economic and Financial Committee and Euro Working Group. First, I'd like to ask you, dear Vice President, to address our audience, and then I will introduce briefly Thomas. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Diriwan, and thank you very much to the organizers, first for your kind invitation, and second for organizing such an important and a good debate. I saw the list of speakers, which is very impressive. I heard about the topics you covered, so I hope that I might add something to the wealth of the information you have already exchanged, because the topic you have chosen for the conference is a very pertinent one, and it gives me very rare opportunity to speak in English in Bratislava, which is my native town. I was asked to talk to you a little bit about new vision for Europe. But I believe that all of you would agree that if you would like to speak about the future, we also need to look a little bit backwards. So allow me just to dwell a little bit on the past, on the situation which actually brought us here to today's discussions and today's situation. Why? Because the economic tribulation we have seen over the last few years presented what I would call the greatest threat to the European unity for the last 60 years. It was really that dramatic. If you would remember, Lisbon strategy in the year 2000 was declaring that 10 years later we want to be the most competitive economy in the world. And I believe that we would also agree that a lot of positive things has been done, but overall picture, aggravated by the crisis, is very much different. By the end of the decade, we've been faced with spiraling debts, with rising unemployment, stagnating growth, and worst of all, apparent inability to act decisively. We clearly been denting the confidence in the EU, the confidence in the EU decision-making process, and the confidence in the European leadership. We have seen how difficult it was on European, but especially on national level. In the course of this crisis, we have lost 17 heads of state or government. This was the reaction of the citizens who've been clearly telling the political leadership that they didn't like the way how the crisis is handled, that they didn't accept the recipes which have been offered to them. We have also seen that the problems have been common to all European countries. The cause has been very much the same. But each member state was trying to sort it out on its own. It was a situation where each country was trying a different recipe, different approaches, and we have clearly seen that this simply was not working. Because everybody was trying to put its own house in order without clear considerations for the other 26 member states. And therefore, the measures which have been taken on the national level have been very often not effective. They didn't bring the required results, and simply we've been going deeper and deeper into the economic crisis. It took us the Greek crisis. It took us the situation where we felt clear and present danger of the breakup of the Eurozone and of the big threat to the European unity and to the European Union itself. Then finally, we realized that our economies are so intertwined, that we are so interlinked, that even the situation in the small economy of one of the member states can have such a negative adverse effect on us all, on the whole European economy, on all 27 member states. So in 2010, we finally moved into what I would call truly coordinated European action. And if you look what has happened since that over the last 2 years, we've been gradually replacing this piecemeal approach where each country was trying to sort it out, the problem on its own, to the European approach, to the European strategy. And I would like to underline the fact, a coordinated strategy that would be unthinkable. And I would repeat, unthinkable just few years before. Many of us been sitting together in different formations which been discussing and preparing the Lisbon Treaty. And I'm sure that you would remember that if any of the measures which have been adopted over the last 2 years been proposed at that time, they would be clearly refused. They will be perceived as unthinkable for another 10, 15, or 20 years. In a little over 2 years, we have put in place the measures which have been aimed at curbing excessive deficit. There have been measures adopted which could impose the fines on those countries which do not respect the common agreed rules. We have adopted the set of measures like fiscal compact or six-pack, and you know that I'm not talking about the beer, but I'm talking about the package of the 6 very important measures which should keep our public finances in order. We have approved the European Stability Mechanism and built the tallest financial firewall of 500 billion euros in the world, which should help us to break the link between the banks and sovereign debt. In December, we recorded another unbelievable breakthrough, if you look at it from the perspective of just a few years ago, where we managed to agree on a single supervisory mechanism for all of the Europe's bank, and I can say that we have sown the seeds for the fully fledged banking union. Of course, I am not suggesting, not at all, that we are out of the woods, that we are out of the trees, that we are out of the crisis. But we also would agree that today the atmosphere is much more optimistic than it was 12 or 18 months ago. I remember the discussions we had a year ago. If you would think of the days and weeks before the Greek elections, the atmosphere is totally different. Today, nobody speaks about the breakup of Eurozone. Everybody sees that the euro currency is very solid. It's strengthening. Some even think that that's too much. But it's quite clear that this, what I believe, is gradual reconquering of the trust into the European Union, European project, European currencies, bringing its dividend in all economic indices we have since the beginning of the year, which are indicating that we will see the recovery probably relatively subdued in the first half of the year, a little bit better in the second half of the year, and we believe in the Commission, and I presume that this would be also confirmed by our Friday's forecast, that the recovery should come with better numbers in 2014. So we are working very hard in restoring the confidence to the European project. But we also have to acknowledge that the recovery and the situation in which we are is still very fragile. If we just look at the situation with unemployment, it's clearly alarming, and we know how difficult it is to tackle this problem in this country, in Slovakia, in Spain, and other countries where clearly this is the crisis within the crisis to which we have to pay enormous attention. If you allow me to pass now to the future. Because if we want to clearly underline and consolidate the confidence in our project, we need to show what we are ready to do for having true European economic and monetary union. What should be this new vision for Europe? I was just speaking a minute ago how we strengthened the economic governance, how much we improved our collective decision-making and collective evaluation of economic policies in the member states. I just came from the Slovak parliament where I was explaining how the European semesters work and how we would like to involve national parliaments more into this process, so the national parliaments would also feel much stronger ownership in this collective management of our national and European economies. We have seen the positive developments in the program countries, be it with Ireland, where we hope that they will come back to the markets later this year. We see the exports are growing in Portugal, Spain, and I think that we are now in a much better situation in Greece as well. But of course, we also see another element where more of the sovereignty is pooled and shared, the need to discuss more of the issues of the political legitimacy, democratic accountability, and the stages, which I'm sure will have to come next to the economic and monetary union and result in what would be the future fiscal and political union of the European member states. If I could remind you that many of these features being underlined in the Commission's blueprint, where we wanted to clearly state what we see as the immediate priority, what we'd like to achieve in the medium term, and what should be the final stage 5 or 10 years from now. We just clearly wanted to show to our citizens, but also to financial markets and to our partners, that we have the vision which goes over the horizon, that we want to go the full way and to complete the European project by the political union in the end. And of course, with this, we have to start immediately. I was speaking about the six-pack. Today, I'm very glad to say that I just received the information that the two-pack was approved in trilogue, so now I believe it's just a matter of official conclusion of the legislative work on these also very important measures. And I would be surprised that part of that agreement was the demand by the European Parliament that the European Commission should set up the working group to study the possibility of the European Redemption Fund. And we have to present the results in 2014, hoping that it would set the good discussion topic for the pre-election campaign to the European Parliament and something to work on for the new Commission, which will come into the office later next year. But if it comes to the Commission blueprint and to the clear parts of what should be the true, genuine economic and monetary union, one of the features we are suggesting is that the Eurozone should develop its fiscal capacity. It's called Convergence and Competitive Instrument. It should be the fiscal ability to help the member states who go through the difficult period of demanding structural reform to financially absorb it. We would like to see the single resolution mechanism in place to deal with the banks in difficulties. And here the Commission promised that despite the work which is now going on the resolution mechanisms which are based on national level, that in this first semester Commission will come with a proposal by which it will propose the European resolution mechanism, which should be such an umbrella over these national schemes, because we see it as a second very important pillar of the banking union. We would, of course, continue with the rigorous implementation of all the new powers which have been given to the European level, stemming from the macroeconomic discipline, supervising the budget, checking the macroeconomic health of the member states, and of course issuing the country-specific recommendations where we believe the structural changes or structural reforms reforms are needed. And then, of course, we proposed in the blueprint what we believe should be second and what should be the third stage. Because here it's quite clear that in most of this, or for most of these measures, we would need to change the treaties. And I think here comes the crux of the matter, the question that Ambassador Korczok put on the table: how much of the political resolve, how much of the political will there will be for these very important decisions with the far-reaching consequences, with enormous political investment to be made if the economic situations improves a little. But we in the Commission believe that we should go, as I said, all the way. That we have to work on Eurobills. We have to work on proper fiscal capacity for the Eurozone. That we have to create the conditions once the economy stabilizes and once we will have a much better situation and much more responsible behavior in the Eurozone member states, to create the possibilities for the issuing of the Eurobonds. Because only then we can say that we made it all the way and we have fully fledged working economic and monetary union. And of course, this has to be done in a full transparency, in a full political debate among the member states and in the debate with the European national parliaments and with our citizens. Because if we want to create the new vision for more Europe and we want to pool more national sovereignties together, we cannot end up bringing actually less Europe by creating the situation where all these changes would seem to be adopted in a way which was less democratic, which was not transparent, and creating a system which is less accountable. Therefore, I think that we cannot avoid the situation where we would progress in the building up of the EMU and lagging behind with all control and democratic oversight mechanisms on the European and the national level. Big part of the European economy, besides the governance and managing our common currency, is also the competitiveness. I started to talk about it when I mentioned the Lisbon strategy. I'm not going to dwell on the EU 2020 strategy, but it's quite clear that we need to improve the competitiveness of the European economy. It's of course a national task. Of course it's task for our educational systems, for our researchers, for our scientists, but it's also a very important task for all those in the European Union who are responsible for the single market. Because knowing what kind of potential we have there, knowing how much we can benefit if we use it much better, I think we should really be sorry that we do not use the single market much better and to much bigger extent. And therefore, the Commission came with these two single market acts where we want to tackle the remaining barriers in the services, in the energy sectors, and in all other areas, because we have seen what single market did in the present form. Between 1992 and 2008, the single market generated almost 3 million new jobs. It had more than 2% to the European GDP, and we know that we can get much more if we would use the single market principle and remove the barriers in all other areas, services, in digital economy, and anywhere else. Even the harshest critics of the European Union agree that the single market is very important, and I would throw one provocative thought. Can you imagine what would be the parameters of the crisis if we wouldn't have it? What kind of protectionist barriers would be created among the member states? And let's be honest, there have been such attempts. We heard different kind of proposals concerning steel, car industry, and many other areas. It was not an easy job to keep single market intact, to keep single market working, and now I believe that we won that political battle, and now everybody recognizes that we should use single market much better as a major driver for new jobs and new competitiveness in the European Union. Of course, for competitiveness, for growth, you need also financial resources, you need money. And I think that the decision which was adopted by the last European Council of the multi-annual financial perspective should be welcome in that respect. Of course, you would understand that we in the Commission felt a little bit disappointed because for the first time in the history of the European Union, we will have the financial perspective which should be actually smaller than the 7 years budget we have currently in place. We, of course, wanted to see more modernization, to invest more in research and development, to invest more in European instruments like Connecting Europe facilities. But at the same time, we have to recognize the current situation. We have to recognize the fact that this is a decision which is adopted by 27. And we also have to recognize the fact that also this financial perspective, if properly managed, if well organized, can actually bring us almost the same benefits as the current one. Therefore, we are now investing enormous efforts in playing the role of honest broker, which would help this political agreement which was achieved among the heads of state and government of the EU to get the consent from the European Parliament. The first meeting was yesterday. European Parliament clearly stated 3 outstanding demands. First one is to introduce much more flexibility in the budget, which we wholeheartedly support in the Commission because we believe that if we have more leeway and much more flexibility to manage the budget between the priorities, between different headings, that it would actually help us to spend better and even more than we are spending right now when we are very much suffering because of the rigidity of the budget. They would like to see the revision in the MFF in 2-3 years' time because they believe that the economy will pick up and maybe we will need to look again if this 7 years budget is exactly what the European economy would need in 2-3 years. And then, of course, they would like to see the strong language on the own resources, which of course would help tremendously the negotiations on annual and 7 years budget, which are very much marked by the tensions among the finance ministers who have to foot the bill for 85% of the European budget. And I can imagine that everybody is looking about how much they put in the budget, how much they get without looking at the secondary benefits the EU is bringing to the economy. As you know very well, for Slovakia, this was quite successful outcome. 20 billion of euros coming to Slovakia creates tremendous opportunity to positively, dramatically change this country, to modernize it, to bring new opportunities, to develop research development, improve schooling, and really tackle all the social problems we have in Slovakia. And I believe that once properly set up, this could really be a tremendous boost for Slovakia and for Slovak economy. If you allow me to move to the conclusions by also speaking not only about the new vision, which is called More Europe, but also how it would be if we would have less Europe, or if we would have Europe of several speeds, if we would have Europe which if listened to all different voices in this discussion, would be synonymous with a Europe a la carte, where everybody will cherry pick what they want, refuse what they don't like, and we will have the Europe which will be very difficult to manage. It will be not easy to recognize this type of the Europe, and therefore I think that we have to do everything possible that we would overcome the possibility of this divide, that we would preserve the cohesion of very soon 28 member states, and we would look for the best combination of what is a necessity and what is the possibility. The necessity clearly is that the Eurozone must go forward, must deepen its integration, and must do it at much higher speed than some of the member states which are not in the Eurozone would have great difficulty to follow or to do. And I think that this is supported by everyone, by all the member states who are which are not in the Eurozone, because they realize how important it is to have a healthy, well-performing Eurozone for the rest of the European economy. And this, I'm pretty sure, will happen. But we need also to make sure that all kinds of frameworks, all types of cooperation must remain open for everybody else who want to join this cooperation. Let's remember, with the exception of 2 member states, it's a legal obligation for each EU member state to join the Eurozone. So it would be foolish to create artificial barriers or to create obstacles for those who most probably will join Eurozone later. And therefore, I think we have to make sure that the Eurozone will have its ability to move faster, but the doors will be open for everybody else who would like to join and who would like to cooperate in all this framework of cooperation. And if you allow me just last few words, because this is the question I'm getting quite a lot. I have to admit, mostly from the students, mostly from the children, because they are asking me how I believe the Europe will look like in 2050. And these days you hear a lot of European criticism and skepticism, so let me give you a little bit different pictures. At first, I believe that with this new instrument put in order, with this new institutional setup, with this new quality of economic governance, I believe that the crisis we are going through right now will never happen or never repeat itself in the future. I believe that European member states will use the same currency. I believe that we will have the healthiest public finances in the world. That the new system we introduce will not allow us to spend irresponsibly and beyond our needs in the way that we could harm other member states and the European citizens. And if you look at what we are going through right now, what we are doing, and if you see the consolidation effort which will bring the budget deficits in the EU this year, what I believe will be 3 percentage points, this is pretty impressive results, and try to compare it with other major world economies. I believe that European citizens will have the comprehensive and effective rights which will be unparalleled in the world. Right to live, to study, to work, to retire, wherever they want in the European Union. They will have access to the low-cost modern technology, Europe-wide network of transport links that is cheap and efficient to run, and they will have access to businesses and services from the length and the breadth of the continent. They will have the best protection at work, at home, and on the road. And if you look again what we are doing and on what we are working right now, this is already happening as well. So we do not have to wait to 2050 to see all of this, because if you look at trade, we already concluded very ambitious agreement with Korea. We are about to conclude the agreement with Canada, Singapore. We just started with the United States. We have a mandate to negotiate with Japan. We got very encouraging signs from ASEAN, Mercosur countries, and even India is much more interested in having free trade agreements with the European Union. And I think this should be very much welcome, because each additional 1 billion of exports supports 15,000 additional jobs in the European Union. And we are very good traders, the Europeans. We are still major trader, which is not, who didn't lose its share of trade, which is still around 20%. And if you compare it with traditional economies, all of them went down. We keep, despite all the problems I listed in the beginning, very solid position in the foreign trade. I also believe that Europe will be world leading advocate of the fight against climate change, most fervent defender of the human rights, that we will remain the largest aid donor and best promoter of the social justice. And this is also happening already right now. So in fact, we do not have to look that far for what we can achieve in a much shorter period of time. But I'm also sure that if we want to look in the future, we just have to look also a little bit in the past. And if I sounded a little bit too optimistic or utopian, just remember or try to picture how today's achievement would be viewed by the European politicians in 1940, or how today's conference would be perceived in this country 25 years ago, where the Iron Curtain just started 2 kilometers from this hotel. So a lot has been done. We have to be, I think, very proud of it. And if we have a problem to be acknowledging it, sometimes we need the Nobel Prize Committee to remind us of that. I think it was something which we needed. It was very encouraging, and I believe that on all these strong fundamentals, we will clearly be able to work on what will be genuine economic and monetary union, and it will bring us closer to the final stage of the European political union, be it the Federation of the Nation-States, be it stronger European Union with more pooled sovereignty shared together, but I'm sure that it would be the decision which will make Europe even more attractive and stronger than it is right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vice President, for sharing with us your vision of Europe. Thank you, of European Union. Thank you for reminding us what was already achieved, because indeed, what happened over the last 3 years was a short while ago unthinkable. And in fact, those unprecedented measures that were adopted are, in my view, already part of a vision that on which we will be working. We also expectedly, for a vice president of a commission, heard a very clear and determined plea for more Europe, because that's what many share. When I say many, of course, not all of them, but we see one thing evolving, a consensus evolving, that if you want to have a currency, a common currency, you cannot continue an experiment of having common monetary policy but not having common economic policy. And having common economic policy cannot be unless you pool more of sovereignty. But that's a challenge of these days and of tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, our second speaker on this panel is Thomas Wieser. He is a respected, I add, a powerful chairman of 2 committees, Economic and Financial Committee and Euro Working Group. Those 2 bodies, in fact, I will simplify a little bit, but to bring across the message of the importance of those 2 committees that he is chairing, became a command center during the Eurozone crisis, from which operational measures were, or where they were invented, from where this rescue operation was run to save common currency. Thomas Wieser is not only an expert with outstanding knowledge of financial and economic business, but what I value most on Thomas Wieser is the fact that he is an expert with huge political feeling. He has proven that several times, and I was witness of that in the long night sessions during the European Councils, where heads of state and governments knew exactly what was politically needed. But let me apologize when I say, but they had no idea how to transform it in an operational solution. And that was always the job for Thomas Wieser. When I saw him coming in after prime ministers were dwelling for 2 hours on one paragraph, and then this man came to the table and he said, okay, this sentence will resolve your problem. As I said, he is chairing 2 very specific committees, and therefore, Thomas, we ambassadors, are very jealous. And you upset us very often with your 2 committees, because there are 2 committees only where there is unwritten rule that we ambassadors have no say. Simply what they agree there, we are not expected to touch anymore. And therefore, Thomas, we want to challenge you a little bit today and ask you, a man of operative financial business, to share with us your view of the vision of Europe. And I think he is the right person to talk about, because the vision of Europe, I'm convinced, will very much be determined by the shape of Eurozone. And the shape of Eurozone will very much depend on the measures where Thomas Wieser has his very substantial share. Thomas, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me. We used to have a chancellor who said, anybody who's got a vision should go to the doctor. With that caveat, I think Europe is a continent which has generated many more visions than one nowadays realizes, where one thinks it's always the Americans with their very positive attitude who are those who have the strategies, the visions, who are positively looking forward. But in reality, if you look back over the decades and centuries, Europe has had a more than fair share of such visions, usually after major upheavals and catastrophes. And so the first precondition for having a good vision for the future, we've fulfilled that for you. We've produced a major upheaval. But as we think of where we are, we have a historically more broad experience of internal markets and monetary unions than many of us realize. My grandmother would have been 117 next month. She didn't quite make it. But exactly 100 years ago, she was working in a pharmacy in Bratislava. Sort of once every couple of weeks, she took the tram into Vienna in the evening to go to the opera. And she was living in a currency union at the time. And she was living in an internal market at the time. So there is an experience. There is also an experience that this internal market and currency union fell apart. There's a very good book by Rudi Dornbusch on dissolving the currency union of the K&K Empire. Very good book, very thin. But it obviously did not fall apart because of Sarajevo. It fell apart for many reasons, one of which may have been a lack of democratic accountability, which makes you ask, who in Brussels is Franz Josef? We can take our bets on that. It fell apart because of the nationality question. It fell apart because of the language question, funnily enough, which we cannot have in Brussels, thanks to the very many good services of the Council Translation Service. And it was considered, and I think to this day remembered, the word der Völkerkerker, the prison of nations. So I think one needs to realize that in everything that we are doing, there is a question of not only democratic accountability, not only the question of democratic legitimacy, but it is the question of identity and how to retain your personal identity, your regional identity, your national identity, whilst becoming something, being part of something that is considerably larger. So these are lessons one sometimes forgets if one just thinks of where are we going over the next 2-3 years. Do we have a single supervisor, and will it be in Frank or in Furt? Will it have 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 employees? I think we need, from time to time, we need to step back a little bit. And in so stepping back, lots has been said yesterday and today on the reasons of why we are in such a crisis. And I would like to offer, just in a couple of minutes, a very short view of the reasons which paraphrase a bit of what previous speakers have said. Essentially, it is, I believe, and I've got lots of data to back that up, essentially I believe it is the inability of Western governments in industrialized economies to come to grips with globalization over the past 20 years. And globalization and the emergence of China and many others from the beginning of the 80s onwards has challenged preconceived notions that very many of us, especially in Western Europe and the US, had and still have, that there is something, a natural law, as it were, that the West is economically and therefore politically the dominant feature on the global scale. But this has not always been the case. If you look at historical growth data, the West, however you want to define it, was ahead of the East, however you want to define it, for a couple of hundred years until approximately 500 Anno Domini. And from 500 to 1770, there are even more precise calculations which one should take with a pinch of salt, the East was considerably more developed and had a higher degree, had higher growth rates, had a higher GDP per capita than the West. And then it was only in 1770 approximately when this picture changed, but this is something which we ignore. In the beginning of the 15th century, in 1405, a Chinese admiral set sail from Nanjing to Sri Lanka with a fleet of 300 ships. He had 128 doctors on board. There were large vessels which were transporting fresh water. The ships were equipped with magnetic compass. 87 years later, Columbus set sail for America, with 90 people in 3 boats. They didn't have any fresh water, and most of the time they didn't even know where they were. So I think the relative weight of West and East is something that needs to be re-examined, but politics could not really accept the decline or the relative inability of our economies to come to grips with globalization, competition, which also meant a transfer of purchasing power to emerging countries, which meant a challenge of income distribution in our economies, and therefore relative decline, at least of the lower scale of our population. What did they do? They shoveled money onto the problem. They produced subsidies for the less skillful. They abolished income tax for the lower income tax brackets in the hope of making them successfully compete against Chinese labor. And in so doing, we have pumped up an enormous amount of leverage into our government sectors. In other countries, this creation of debt and leverage was done through the financial sector, usually by inciting large parts of the population to take out mortgages against real estate, and with naturally, therefore, rising values of real estate, they could mortgage that more and more and more. And it has landed us ultimately with costs for the taxpayer, because the lender of last resort ultimately is the taxpayer. So in trying to avoid the consequences of globalization, we have created an industrialized world of over-indebtedness. We need to deleverage, and we need to reinvent our model. So I think this shows it's not only about economics, it's also very much about politics in how we can move forward and have a vision for a monetary union which is vibrant and dynamic, and for which it is actually worth having a vision. But that means, of course, that we need to have the ability to compete, to innovate, to grow, to employ, and to stabilize our economies. With the present structure of our budgets, which are geared to more financing backward-looking expenditures, such as salaries for civil servants, yes, all of us, early retirement schemes, fairly high pensions, extremely high healthcare systems, and the like. Most of our budget money is spent or committed before it actually leaves the budget. There is hardly anything left in order to finance education. There is hardly anything left in order to finance research and development. There is hardly anything left in order to finance innovation. And despite your understandably positive words about the recent MFF negotiations, in a way it reflects the state of national budgets. They're backward-looking, they're undynamic, they're very stable, but they do nothing to move our economies into the 21st century. And why is that? Because it's so damn easy to cut budgets where discretionary spending is housed. If you take the example of Italy, Italy does not have a large deficit, but Italy has been cutting deficits for the last 20 years by saving on investment in infrastructure, by saving on investment in education, by saving on investment in R&D, by saving on investment in universities. And it is showing already in the potential rate of output of Italy. And Italy is not alone. Italy is pars pro toto. So we need to make difficult decisions, and that's where politics comes in, because that's why the decisions have not been taken. They're damn difficult for politicians to take. And as Jean-Claude Juncker said, rightly so, I'm afraid, we all know what to do correctly, but we don't know how to get re-elected after we've done it. So, but we also need to order things in a different manner than we have done hitherto. And politics have got a bad name nowadays, and being a politician is probably one of the least desirable jobs in these days, sometimes even more maligned than being a banker. And why is that? My personal view is that more than half of the issues that a politician in a small country is nominally responsible for, he doesn't have a clue of what is happening, and they're totally beyond his control. More than half. But can he go back to his local electorate and say, ladies and gentlemen, this is beyond my control. I've just come back from Brussels. I didn't really understand what they were saying, but everything's under control. That's one possibility. The other possibility is that he comes back and says, ladies and gentlemen, everything was pre-cooked by the Germans and the French, but I've said yes. But we will transpose it into domestic legislation. So this is something that this politician cannot say. So it's a game, it's become more and more, much more than 30 years ago, it's become a game of make-believe. It's pretending that you've got things under control, whereas in reality, they're not out of control, but they're beyond your control. And I think this is what other people have said in a different manner. We need to recognize and realize we're in a monetary union. You have to federalize the institutions and federalize the decisions so that the correct things are done at the correct level. Christian Kastrup said today he understands the British that things need to be moved back to the nation state. And some things need to be moved up to the center. We have heard mention of banking, finance, to a certain extent fiscal solutions, some tax issues, a sensitive issue in low-tax countries, because the smaller you are and the lower your tax rate is, the more you believe in tax competition, right down to the fact that very, very small countries then have very, very low rates, and that's when the not quite so small countries get upset. You need fiscal elements for stabilization. You need fiscal elements at the federal level in order to increase discipline. When all of this is said and done, we need to recognize that the way we do business at the center is extremely inefficient. Extremely inefficient. At the Eurogroup, we've got 17 member states who are present, 17 finance ministers, plus the vice president of the Commission, the president of the European Central Bank. If we're in deep trouble, also the managing director of the IMF as a valued guest. And we do what we need to do by arriving at a consensus. And this can take not only hours until 5 o'clock in the morning, it can imply that we need to meet the week after and the week after and the week after, because these are very difficult decisions that national finance ministers have to take, who then need to go back to their parliament and say, I'm sorry, I just agreed to participate in a 500 billion enterprise. And the parliament will say, and where does that leave us? So I don't have only 17 finance ministers in my back, I've got probably something like 6,000 parliamentarians breathing down my neck. This is, you can't run a monetary union like that. So I think in the long run, one needs to recognize that with the present structure, this is something which is slow, it is inefficient, it is stable, but we will have to move to a different kind of conducting business at the federal level with, quite probably, in the long run, a high degree of elected politicians conducting the centrally necessary elements, and therefore also responsible to a parliament. Would they be responsible to the European Parliament in its present configuration? I would find that extremely hard to foresee. Political union and fiscal union without complete changes in the constitutions of at present 17 member states, I believe can only work if you take and lift some elements of the constitutional powers of national parliaments and join them together at the center in Brussels. Because as soon as the Slovak parliament knows that 3% of its GDP are being decided in Brussels, some part of the Slovak constitution will have to move to Brussels. Otherwise, whoever is speaking for Slovakia there will be unconstitutional or even anti-constitutional. But the European Parliament in its present configuration is not equipped to deal with that. So I think we will also have to, in parallel to having elected people doing our business, we will have to rethink the way our constitutions are divided between capitals at home and a European capital called Brussels. And this will enable us, and I'm coming to an end, this will enable us then to move to a considerably more efficient way of coordinating our business. How do we coordinate now? We've got bureaucratic procedures. You've been inundated with acronyms today and yesterday. We've got LTRO, we've got EFSF, we've got ESM, we've got OMT, we've got six-pack, two-pack.
Beyond.
What's it? These are, we do fiscal policy coordination by bureaucratic procedure. We've got pages and pages, we've got books with rules. And if you flout the rules, somebody looks really cross. We've got atomic bomb sanctions against those who flout the rules, which in the last 1.5 decades have not been applied because they are so drastic. But it's bureaucracy, it's legislative processes. And that's why it makes it so difficult to translate into national procedures and make it part of the national political and economic policy culture. It needs to become more politicized, that there is a political responsibility, not only a bureaucratic responsibility. And that, I think, noting that you went to the Slovak parliament today, at present, this is simply done by the finance minister going back home and saying, I had a very bad experience yesterday in Brussels. I caught it in the neck because of our draft budget. And colleagues in government will probably say, oh yeah, and what did you have for dinner? So we need to join this together much more in a political manner with the involvement of national parliaments, which will require a rethink and a revamp of the treaties and also of national constitutions. Now, all of this will probably not be in the time when I'm still professionally active. I wanted to step a bit back into the past and show where I believe the euro area could be going not in 5 years' time, but maybe in 15 years' time, because in the papers you read very much about tomorrow, but seldom about the day after tomorrow. Maybe just the last word on the UK debate, because I found it quite striking. Many people are obsessing about how nasty it is of the UK and this and that. I found it extremely interesting to observe the political debate in major media on the continent. I was going to say in Europe, on the continent, in French and in German and in others, which reminded us that the European Union is not only about economics, it's first and foremost about politics. It's first and foremost about the willingness of Germany to be tied down by constitutional and institutional processes, but which have to function not only for the large countries, not only for Germany and France, but where a, let's say, balance of power is produced, which also involves the small countries and small economies of Europe. And a fortiori, this holds, I think, for monetary union. It is, yes, about monetary, it is, yes, about economic, but there is a huge degree of politics behind it. And therefore, we should never forget it's binding us together in a way which ultimately should be stability enhancing, also in a societal and political and security aspect. So, thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Thomas. I need to keep the time management somehow under control because both Vice President and our next panelist will follow. But I think we still can afford about 10 minutes for a couple of questions, maybe one or two, to allow our speakers to respond, because I think they have presented two outstanding views on what's going on now in the European Union, and especially in what direction the EU can evolve. So please, gentlemen here, your question. A microphone, please.
My name is Jan Morovic. I am former president of the university. I was very much touched with your speech, last speaker, about the constitution and the cooperation between national bodies and authorities. Why we are not setting up some kind of common denominator, what would be nice to find in the searching of solution in different countries' constitution, and set up some kind of cooperation which would be some kind of starting point, how to start up to cooperate deeper and create a stronger and more efficient way of development. Thank you.
Okay. I take the next question too, and then I will ask the gentleman over there.
Ivan Kun, Conservative Institute. So my question is, what's from your point of view, the end or the final objective of European integration? Is an economic and monetary union, or is it a federal state, European federal state with bicameral parliament like it is in the United States or in Germany? Thank you.
Okay, so, I take the one from there, and then I will give the floor to our panelists.
Samuel Ochan, Sberbank. I would like to say, react on Mr. Šefčovič that because you said that till 2050 you do not expect crisis like we have right now. I'm not so optimistic because we are in a market, and for market is characteristic that we move on cycles, so there are of course also downturns like we are right now in, and the crisis now is basically coming from the situation we have in Europe, that we have huge bulks of money, billions in financial instruments and on our accounts. So high amount of money on aggregated level. And we somehow feel, people from real economy, that it is not in line with the performance of our economy. So that there is a gap. And the whole crisis is about that the system would like to close the gap. And therefore we do not know what value represents what commodity, what service, and so on. And from this is coming the main uncertainty, which is causing all these problems. But it is nothing new. We saw that also during other crises in the past. The problem is, and what makes the crisis worse in Europe, in Eurozone, is that the reaction from the system is not appropriate. It is coming too late, and my question is, where is the problem? Is it really just about the governance, that we have to, so to say, develop systems and mechanisms which we have had to develop when we launched the project of Eurozone? Was it forgotten, or we were not able at that time to establish such systems which can steer against the crisis? Was it done intentionally? Like, okay, let's start with Eurozone, although we know that we overstepped as minimum 2 phases of integration, and let's see how we will handle it. Or the governance model was counting on that, and there was just lack of leadership. What is, from your point of view, behind the problem? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. So we have 3 questions. You are free to take any of them. First one, more or less, was a question of legitimacy and a reflection of what you said, Thomas, about relationship institutions on the central level vis-à-vis the domestic political perceptions of the decision-making. Second question on finalité. That means what will be the end stage, if you want, of current efforts. And the third one, if I understand correctly, there simply you say, if I may paraphrase, or you have doubts about the sustainability of a medicine, of a remedy that we were trying to apply to overcome the crisis. And no doubt that there are some risks involved in that. So, gentlemen, please.
Thank you very much, Thomas. At first, I think that the question of democratic accountability, political legitimacy, and parliamentary involvement in all this decision-making process. And I think that the question is very much here with us, and I think that we never felt it so urgently before as we feel it right now. And I can tell you that I feel it in every meeting I have with the national parliaments, especially when I go to present the country-specific recommendations to the national parliaments. I did it the last year when I went to Bundestag. And you can imagine to present the recommendation, which was really going into the nerve of the political debate in Germany, because I was pleading for better preschool facilities in Germany, because we clearly see that this is hampering too many women to participate in the labor market. And I can tell you that it's very much the same when you suggest that you need to change the pension system, or that you need to change the educational reform, which was just concluded 2 or 3 years ago. So these debates are very difficult, and they are difficult for the reason, because from the European level, we are trying to open the debates which have been locked down for many years because it was politically inconvenient, because it was super sensitive, because the politicians knew that this must be done, but they've been afraid that they will not be re-elected if they do it, because it's simply very harsh medicine. And therefore, I think it was quite obvious that we need to help national level to get the message across the structural reforms, which are so painful as we see it in especially the program countries, must be done, because otherwise the social system, the political system, economic system would not function, not perform. And therefore, we are coming with these recommendations. Therefore, there was a decision on the European level that we need to have this new economic governance system. Of course, it opens very big question, who gives you the right, under whose democratic control you are working. And there, we are in a very complicated situation which is permanently evolving, because you have areas where I would say the competencies or the oversight of the European Parliament clearly collides or overlaps with the competencies of the national parliaments. And each of them believes that they have right to be the first to ask, to be accountable to, and to have the clear democratic right to comment on this issue and to work on it. And at this stage, because I'm saying that this is evolving issue, we see how these new instruments are being built up. There is such a formation which is called COSAC. These are regular meetings of the parliamentarians who are sitting in the EU affairs committees, who are meeting at least twice during the presidency with the representatives of the European Parliament. Now it's quite clear that the COSAC wants also to have not only these European affairs branch or characteristic, but also budgetary and economic debates. We had, for the first time, Interparliamentary Week in Brussels 3 weeks ago, where again, the national parliaments and the European Parliament been participating in a common debate with the European Commission, with the Council representative, with the President Van Rompuy. So we are clearly going into the direction where some kind of interparliamentary cooperation would be beefed up, would be strengthened, and which will do its best to provide the democratic accountability and democratic legitimacy. So we will see how this would evolve, because I think both us working in Brussels, but the politicians working in national capitals clearly feel that if we want to succeed, the ownership of this process, of this democratic accountability on the economic governance must be joint. It cannot be perceived that Brussels comes and impose something so difficult on us. It must be common approach and common ownership, and I'm sure that it will take us some time until we get there, because I think that, as Thomas rightly pointed out, now we are working in the framework which is charted down by the treaties, and for the first step, most probably, in most of these long-reaching proposals and measures, we would need to change the treaties, which will not be easy project. The question on what should be the finalité, what should be the end game. Again, my personal view is that we can call it or political union, or as President of the Commission described it in his State of the Union address, the federation of the nation state. I personally do not believe that, let's say, in our political life, we would see something which would be similar to the United States of America, simply because we are different in Europe. Our member states, they have very clear identities. We are very proud to be Slovaks, Czechs, Austrians. We like our flags. We are speaking different languages. We have our own national history. So I believe that the nation state will be building block of, be it this federation of nation states, or be it the political union. We see how difficult it is to communicate from Brussels to the member states. Why? Because for us it's almost impossible to communicate over the heads or over the voices of the national media, of the national politicians. Therefore, I think that we need to do it in sync. We have to cooperate European and national level, and this is how I see the end game. And just very short answer to the last question. Look, I don't think that we have a problem with overcoming economic crisis in Eurozone. Look what's going on in the United States, how long it takes to kickstart the economy there. Look what's going on in Japan, where they are in crisis situations for more than a decade. Look what's going on in the UK. just what is their budget deficit level, what is their overall indebtedness, and for how long they're projected the austerity. So this is something to do, and I very much agree with Thomas that simply globalization came so swiftly, so abruptly, that suddenly we have seen in huge plasticity how much we delayed the structural reforms and how we become in several sectors not competitive enough, because we are still largest economy, 25, 26, 27% of the GDP, but if it comes to the social expenses, it's more than 50%, and this simply is the gap I think you've been referring to, and we have to definitely get it much more aligned.
Well,
thank you.
Thank you. I would ask Thomas to briefly respond to the question, in fact, in a more provocative package, whether we can survive, sustain, and at the end of the day, pay the bill for our own rescue measures.
I'll be very short in that because of our time constraints. The classical way of looking at budget consolidation in the European Union and in the industrialized world has been through the lens of sort of conventional macroeconomics. And do we now have to take anti-cyclical measures? And anybody who's raised as a Keynesian, for him or her, it's a no-brainer. Sure. I come from a country where there are only Keynesians, especially in a downswing. In the upswing, they all disappear behind the bushes. So, but this time is different. We have been experiencing too high growth because of the too high leverage that's been pumped into our economies. Sometimes through government expenditures, sometimes through excessive credit. Ask Panos, in a country where 16% equivalent of GDP were in 2009 registered as a deficit. Hell, of course the economy is growing that much faster because you're pumping air into it like there's no tomorrow, but you've got to pay the bill. So it is a bit like a balloon which is close to bursting because it's overfull, so you carefully have to let the air out until it has reached the right size. And therefore, I believe that in quite a number of countries, the question of adjustment simply it does not arise. It needs to be done. There may be the question up or down. Is the adjustment path, should it be like this or like this? But that's about it. Now, some people have said, why did these idiots who designed the Maastricht Treaty forget to have the right instruments in place? So I asked one of the architects of the Maastricht Treaty, why were you old people so stupid and forgot to have all the right instruments in place? He said, we may look stupid, but we were not stupid. We had all the right instruments in place in our drafts. We had the single supervisor in there. We had fiscal capacity in there. Everything was in there. And then it was presented to the politicians. And the politicians said, what? A single supervisor? Banking unit? Oh, no, no, no. So everything was there. And so history, in a way, repeats itself. And with every crisis, we move towards something that is a bit better. So I don't think, if you look over the past 30 years, there was no cognitive problem. It's always a political problem. It's always about the distribution of power between nation states and the center, or even worse, about the perceived distribution of power. And sometimes, let's say, the constitutional rights of many of our politicians remind me of Hans Christian Andersen, The Emperor's New Clothes. As long as you believe you've got the power, you've got the power. But globalization is stripping pretty fast.
Well, thank you. I think that was really the message at the end of the day when we discussed the vision of European Union. I thank very much our panelists, Vice President Maroš Šefčovič and Chairman Thomas Wieser, and I think we have a break now that I think we deserve. Thank you very much for your attention.